In April 1967, a history teacher named Ron Jones made his students a dangerous offer. He couldn't explain how ordinary Germans accepted the Nazi regime. So, he decided to show them instead. The exercise was supposed to last 1 hour. It became a movement, with salutes, secret police, and a bodyguard. By Friday, over 200 students were waiting for a televised leader who didn't actually exist, and none of them had even asked to leave. To understand what happened, we need to go back to April 1967. Ron Jones had just graduated from Stanford. At 25, he was teaching history at High School. Cubbly wasn't a rigid place. The school called itself experimental and open, and Jones fit right in. He brought guest speakers to class. He ran unorthodox lessons. Students quickly saw him as one of the most popular teachers on campus. One day, during a lesson on Nazi Germany, a student asked a question that stopped him cold. The student wanted to know how ordinary Germans could claim they had known nothing about the slaughter of the Jewish people. Jones admitted to the class that he didn't have a good answer. He looked at them and said, "I don't know. Let's try an experiment. I will be the dictator, and you will be the movement." Jones wrote "Strength through discipline" on the chalkboard. Then he told the students how to sit. Feet flat on the floor, hands crossed flat against the small of the back, spine straight, chin down. He explained that this posture would help them concentrate. At first, it felt like a game. The students practiced moving from standing to sitting at attention in under 15 seconds. Then silently in 5. Jones told them they had to stand at the side of their desk to ask or answer a question. Every remark had to begin with Mr. Jones. Answers were limited to 3 words or fewer. He intended the exercise to last 1 class period. But the next morning, Jones walked in and found the students already sitting in the exact posture he had taught them, waiting, in absolute silence. Some smiled because they had pleased the teacher, but most sat with rigid necks and empty faces, straining to get every tiny detail exactly right. Jones had planned to stop at this point. Instead, he wrote a second slogan on the board: "Strength through community." He named the movement the Third Wave, based on surfer law that the third wave in a series is always the strongest. Then he invented a salute, and he ordered the students to use it on each other, in the hallways, in the cafeteria, in the library. Within hours, other students were asking if they could join. The Vietnam War was escalating. Boys in that classroom were only 2 years away from facing the draft. That tension hung in the air and made the promise of discipline and community feel oddly appealing. By Wednesday, Jones had lost the option to simply end the exercise. He issued membership cards to anyone who wanted to continue. Not a single student elected to leave, even though the class had grown from 30 to 43 students, and 13 of them had cut their other classes just to be there. Jones wrote a third slogan on the chalkboard: "Strength through action." He told the class that discipline and community were meaningless without action, and that action meant taking full responsibility for what you believed. While the students sat at attention, he reached into his pocket and began handing out cards. 3 of the cards were marked with a small red X. Those 3 students had a special assignment: to report any member who failed to follow the rules. He had appointed secret police. He was shocked when approximately 20 students came forward with reports about their classmates. Only 3 had been given the official assignment to watch their peers. The rest had simply decided to police each other on their own, without being asked. This was not in the plan. Then something happened that made Jones realize the experiment was no longer inside his control. A student named Robert approached him. Robert was a large boy who struggled academically, who ate lunch alone, whom Jones had never seen smile. But now Robert stood before him and said, "Mr. Jones, I'm your bodyguard. I'm afraid something will happen to you. Can I do it, Mr. Jones? Please?" Jones couldn't say no. For the rest of the day, Robert opened and closed every door for him. He walked always on Jones's right side. He smiled and saluted other members. He followed Jones into the faculty room, which was closed to students. When an English teacher challenged him, Robert simply said, "I am not a student. I'm a bodyguard." At that moment, Jones knew the child had crossed an invisible line. And Jones suspected he had crossed the same line himself. He was beginning to enjoy the order and the attention, and he found it intoxicating. By now, the third wave had spilled far beyond the classroom. The school cook asked what a third wave cookie looked like. The principal walked into a faculty meeting and gave Jones the salute. The librarian hung a banner above the library entrance. Students from other schools were cutting class to join. Over 200 students had signed on by the end of the day. Jones kept waiting for a faculty member to step in and challenge what was happening. Nobody ever did. The parents, the teachers, the administrators, all trusted him without question. 3 of the brightest girls had told their parents everything. A rabbi called Jones at home. Jones told him they were merely studying the German personality. The rabbi accepted the explanation without asking any further questions. The parents went quiet. On Thursday, Jones knew he had to end the experiment. But he couldn't simply stop. Too many students had committed themselves in front of their peers. Emotionally, they had already exposed themselves. If he suddenly told them it was just a game, He would humiliate the very students who had finally felt like they mattered. So he chose an unexpected strategy. He told the class the third wave was part of a nationwide movement, not just a classroom exercise. On Friday at noon, a presidential candidate for the third wave would announce its existence on live television. He ordered the students to attend a rally and to tell no one outside the movement. Then he turned to the three girls who had questioned the experiment and banished them to the school library. 4 guards were assigned to make sure they couldn't attend. Only 2 students actively resisted the entire time. Sherry Towsley was one of Jones's best students. She had been banished early for asking too many questions. She wasn't merely expelled from the room. She anonymously launched an anti-wave resistance group she called the Breakers. Her father drove her to school before the first bell so she could hang anti-wave posters high in the halls, where other students couldn't tear them down. For 40 years, nobody knew she was the one behind it. Alyssa Hess was the other resistor. On the final morning, she stood up in class and urged her classmates not to attend the rally. But the rest of the class was too far inside the movement to listen. Mark Hancock, one of the original students, explained what people don't understand: how gradual the trap was. Jones didn't roll out fascism on Monday. He rolled out better posture. Then he added a salute. Then he added membership cards. By the time you felt trapped, there wasn't much you could do. The only escape was to start a revolution or go to the administration. But both options seemed impossible because everyone you knew was already part of the wave. The middle group of students, the ones who weren't athletes or cheerleaders or part of the in crowd, responded most strongly. Because for the first time in their lives, they felt equal, they felt important, they felt seen. That was the real fuel. On Friday at 11:50 in the morning, students began filing into the small auditorium. Row after row filled up until over 200 students were crammed inside. Third wave banners hung on the walls. Friends of Jones moved through the crowd, posing as reporters and photographers, taking pictures, jotting frantic notes. A group photograph was taken while everyone sat in perfect attention. Jones stood at the front. He gave the salute. 200 arms stabbed upward in reply. He led them in chanting, strength through discipline. The room responded in a repetitive chorus that grew louder each time, until the walls were shaking with the sound. At 12:05, he turned off the lights, walked to the television set, and turned it on. The screen showed only static. The students sat in perfect silence, waiting for their leader to appear. Minutes passed. The screen stayed empty. Nobody moved. Then Jones spoke. There was no leader, no national youth movement called the Third Wave, no televised announcement of any kind waiting for them on the other side of that empty screen. He told them they had been used and manipulated. He told them they were no better or worse than the German Nazis they had been studying. He apologized for how far it had gone. And he played a film about the Nazi regime to conclude the experiment. Some students cried. Others insisted they had known it was a joke all along. Mark Hancock ran out in fear before the announcement finished. What followed was silence. For 10 years, almost nobody spoke about the rally publicly. It wasn't until Jones ran into a former student on a street in Berkeley, many years later, that the story finally began to surface. The student gave him the secret salute. And Jones realized the third wave was still alive. 2 years after the experiment, Jones was denied tenure and left public school teaching for good. He has said repeatedly that he isn't proud of what happened. He has turned down every request to repeat it, including one from a British television company. Here is the part that most people never hear. This wasn't a scientific experiment. There was no control group, no peer-reviewed paper, no trained researcher running the study. Ron Jones was a high school teacher who wanted to answer a student's question. And that makes it less of a study, ma'am, and more of a warning. The students weren't cruel, and they weren't stupid. They were ordinary kids who wanted to belong. Robert finally found a purpose. The middle group finally felt equal and important for the first time in their lives. The bright kids, the ones who questioned everything, found themselves excluded and banished. That is the pattern. It doesn't take hatred to build a movement like this. It only takes the desire to be seen. Think about the world we actually live in. Every day, people follow rules they don't fully understand, because everyone around them is following those same rules. Every day, people trade the discomfort of standing alone for the safety of fitting in. And they don't always notice when the rules stop serving them and start controlling them instead. The third wave didn't begin with hatred. It began with the desire to be seen. The silence lasted 10 years. That silence says more about shame and human conformity than any formal study could ever hope to capture. Which is exactly why the story still matters. The wave that changes ordinary people doesn't come from a dictator. It comes from the part of us that just wants to belong.